Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Delmar, together with my co-host Mark Ronich of jbiztechvalley.com and also statewide news service. We have a very, very special guest with us, Assemblywoman Patricia Fahy. Can I call you Pat?
Of
Is that
course,
a little bit
of
too
course.
informal? Well, in any case, welcome to the Jewish View.
Thank you, my pleasure.
So welcome. This is so exciting. I'm so glad we're going to have a lengthy conversation. Usually I see you at the Capitol and we're running around and we just say hi to each other and we have very little time to say anything else. But
Yeah, most days are these days, yes. So it's my pleasure.
so that's great. And I noticed that, when there have been events at the Capitol in January and March or April, you've been showing up for the Jewish events.
Oh,
that
absolutely,
come,
absolutely.
So you've really, you're a freshman assemblyman, assemblywoman, assembly person, assembly member.
I'll take any of those. I'll take any. It's okay.
Anything that has the word assembly in it.
That's right. That's right. I've been called worse.
And they have so there are some Jewish events that are at the Capitol, and Rabbi Simon is there also for
Yes,
those.
that's how we met.
And I just wanted to show our appreciation that you do embrace the Jewish community and make that note. And,
Thank you.
So thank you.
Yeah.
Don't take things for granted. We don't.
No.
You never have to say you're supposed to. So,
No.
So just so the audience knows, it's the 109th Assembly District, and you represent most of the city of Albany and the towns of Bethlehem, Guilderland, and New Scotland.
That's right. Mhm.
Okay. So what has been your focus? In the first few months, you started January of this year, so the first few months have been getting your staff together, your office together, figuring out the bills and the budget, and I understand that gets overwhelming at times, and you had to serve on certain committees, you had to be appointed to committees. Did you get what you wanted?
I did. First of all, yes, it is and was overwhelming because there's so much that happens the minute you're sworn into office, and then the budget hits very quickly. As soon as the governor makes his state of the state and his budget comes out shortly thereafter,
right.
And the games begin, if you will. So it was fascinating. I do feel, with regard to the committees, I do feel I did quite well. You asked for about 10 in hopes of getting 4 or 5. My top request have been higher education. Education is a driving force in my life, and
in your
something
background,
I feel, and in my background. I'd love elementary, secondary, but they don't allow freshmen like myself on those. But I did get higher education.
Oh, wow.
I got the environment, something very, very important to me, and I got children and families. I had been on the previous governor's children's cabinet, so that was also very important to me.
Governor Patterson's.
Under Governor Patterson. It was the tail end of Governor Spitzer. It started by Governor Spitzer, finished by Governor Patterson, and so another great issue for me. And then I got tourism and parks, and since I'm such a huge enthusiast for this area and this region, that also was a great one, the tourism. And then the final one was banks. That was my surprise committee. Takes me a little out of my comfort zone, but it's a really good way to learn. And while it was relatively quiet this past year, it'll give me a chance to learn a few more issues. So those are the 5.
I want to talk about banks for a second, because while that's out of your comfort zone, do you take advice from the other side of the aisle? Because Steve McLaughlin, who's an area assemblyman, was in the banking business. On the Senate side, the chair of the Banks Committee, I think, is Hugh Farley from Schenectady. So do you sort of ask, even though they're Republicans, do you look past their party affiliation and ask for their advice and talk to them and get up to speed with that?
Not on those issues specifically, because that committee was a little quieter this past year. By the time I was appointed, I think it was late February by the time the committees were assigned for the incoming. We had 25.
Sure.
25 new members. It was quite a turnover in the assembly. It was a huge class, the biggest I understand in over 20 years. So not as much on those issues, but I do make a point of trying to reach across the aisle as much as possible. I worked in Capitol Hill, so I've seen when bodies can change over from Democrat to Republican, and I think we have to treat everybody respectfully anyway. So there's always lots to learn from other members. On the Environmental Committee, Probably there I talked to one of the Republican members most because he's from the Adirondacks here. So I absolutely believe in reaching across the aisle because nobody has a corner and an expertise on any one issue. And I do think it's important to build relationships all over.
You know, I live in Delmar, Mark lives in Albany, and usually we always had, I've been here for over 25 years, different assembly people, you know, where I was always friends with them, of course, but we did have different representation. But now with the relining of the districts, now you gather us together, you combine us to Albany and Bethlehem. I was wondering, you know, because, well, Guilderland and Bethlehem are suburbs, and Albany is a city, and of course they have different needs. How do you maybe handle the different needs of representing maybe two different factions of, you know, people?
Well, that is an excellent question because that caused a lot of confusion. Those were two different assembly districts, and especially in Bethlehem, that was a first that they've combined them. And so first it was a real learning curve to let folks know that I represent Bethlehem now, and even though I'm replacing Jack McEnany. So some of it was just introducing myself. One area, I expected it to be a little more difficult because I've been in Albany and I've been very active in Albany and not as well known in the towns. But what worked to my benefit is that so many people have, I'm afraid, left Albany at so many different generations. And so I found it was 1 to 2 degrees of separation. And the one issue that's been a huge one for me, because I'm a former school board member, I found regardless of where I go in the district, that is a big issue, particularly some of the resource needs, some of the concerns about the over-testing of students, concerns about...
What do you mean over-testing? What does that mean?
That's somewhat of a more recent issue, but in the last year in particular, the last school year, the state education department has mandated a whole slew of new tests. And those tests in particular, the state adopted what is called a Common Core curriculum. And while there was a lot of support, and still is a lot of support for that new curriculum, New York, 45 states adopted this new curriculum. It's got a lot of support nationwide, a kind of a more of an in-depth view at different subject areas in short. So while 45 states adopted this new curriculum, only 2 decided to test on it in this past year. So, and New York and Kentucky were 2 of those states. So I'm one who has raised a concern that I think we tested our students prematurely, and we know this past August that 2/3 of students across the state did not meet the standards on these recent tests.
And the other thing is the teachers tend to teach towards the test as opposed to teaching for whatever needs to be taught. And even if it's not on the test, it's not on the test. But because there's such a strong emphasis on the testing, the teachers are teaching towards the test so that the students are prepared for the test.
Yeah.
As opposed to just be prepared for life.
And you mentioned Bethlehem. If we know, you know, as you talk to voters, one of the primary reason people move to Bethlehem because it has such an exceptional school system. Actually, all 3 of the towns have an exceptional school system, and so there's a real interest in the issues, the funding needs, the testing, the curriculum. So right across the board, I found lots of common ground and great support there.
And then the Albany School District. I'm surprised they only graduate 50% of their students.
Yeah, my children are in the Albany schools, in the quote-unquote failing schools.
And you have 3.
Daughter, I have 2, thank you. 2's enough.
You didn't know about the 3rd one?
I didn't know about that 3rd one, but you can tell me.
Okay. 2 children, that's right, okay.
No, actually, regret.
And a husband, which might be the 3rd child.
Yeah, maybe that's it. My husband's a professor, so I guess maybe it's the education. Still in school, perpetually in school. But my kids are in the Albany schools, and I see it, but I also see all of the good things. Do we have a lot of needs? I think so much of the failures that we see in our urban schools, particularly now with these new tests, is the fact that we have a very serious economic divide. That doesn't mean it's a predictor of school failure, and it never should be. But the high concentrations of poverty are often a serious indicator, not predictor. Shouldn't be a predictor. You
know, I'm a person, because I actually do a lot of things. I have 10 different hats, my black hat. But I mean, I go to prisons, and I meet Jewish people, but a lot of people just come in. So I really meet a large sector of the population. And, I just think that sometimes when I see my daughter, who is in school and is taking, of course, the curriculum, even though it's a private school, the Maimonides, which is in Albany, nevertheless, that, I says, I know some of these guys just can't handle it, and that's why, I'm trying to get a grip on also, because I know education is the main thing, and Jewish people, of course, emphasize education, and I see these guys ending up in prison, so something's wrong. And I don't think they're bad people, but it's just because if you drop out and you don't have a job,
Yes.
what are you going to do for a living? You might as well, sell drugs that these guys do. I mean, I'm surely not advocating it, but I mean, it's wrong. But I said, well, get an education. But then, it's very, maybe there should be more vocational. That's what I'm thinking. It's just my own idea. Like, do they need geometry? Some of these guys can't handle it. And I'm sure that one of the reasons, oh man, this is boring. Geometry and this angle and that angle, and what do I need it for? Goodbye and good luck. And if maybe they would get more hands-on education, and then they'd have a trade or feel good about themselves instead of failing this math and chemistry, and
you raise a
that's what I'm
terrific
thinking.
issue that I think the pendulum is slowly swinging back toward. For years, vocational education really got a bad name because there was too much tracking of students and maybe over-labeling students, particularly in many areas it became students of color. I think we're seeing the pendulum swing back, however, with the recognition that not everybody is going to get a PhD in geometry. I don't think I'd have my high school diploma if I had to pass some of the math tests that the students have to pass now. So there is more of a recognition that we have to do more career prep and prepare students for areas of their expertise, because we have it is difficult to address all of those multiple intelligences, and some people have strengths in different areas.
Well, I know you're not on the corrections committee, but maybe sometime. But I have this understanding that the prisoners are entitled to some sort of education. They have law books, and you hear about these inmates when they come out that they become, or that while they're in prison they sue the state or they sue the federal government because they've been reading all these law books, they've been getting self-educated, and there is a determination to try to win, their freedom. And then, because the other part is, I know people who have been in jail, bad things happen to good people, and that they've come out with a felony conviction, and they can't get a job.
They can't get a job, yes.
Would you, in your assembly office, if someone was local and had a felony conviction and they were a good person, would you hire them?
Honestly, I'm not sure. I'd probably be prohibited because of some of the rules that we work under. So I'm not even sure I'd be allowed to if I wanted to.
Isn't that a shame?
Yeah, and again, I'm not sure. I know there's lots of rules for getting into state government, so I might be prohibited. But you're right. The unemployment rates are astronomical. For those coming, those ex-cons, and that is an issue. So we want to make sure we're preventing, and that is why we need to get it right to start with, and we need to make sure we are preventing more and more dropouts. I think we need to do more again to break down some of those concentrations of poverty so that we have positive peer pressure. We need more after-school programs so that kids, some of the highest juvenile crime rates are between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock in the afternoon. We need to make sure we're keeping them in productive after-school type programs with enrichments or sports or whatever the case may be. And again, so prevention is really critical. And I think that some of the issues you raise really resonate with people because they know not everybody is on the same academic track. My kids are good students, but that doesn't mean that every subject is easy. Every child struggles. Most children struggle with certain areas.
What grades are your children in? One's high school, one's middle
school? My daughter just finished Hackett Middle School in Albany.
So she's going Albany High.
Now just started Albany High, and my son is just finishing Albany High. He's a senior.
Okay, so you got the older one to look after the younger one because there's 12th grade and 9th grade.
Yes, and I'll tell you, it's taught me a lot being in the Albany schools because I've learned that you have to look at, you have to peel the onion. My kids have done exceptionally well. Are all kids doing exceptionally well there? Of course not. And that's why we need more parental engagement for sure. some of the things that all of us would do with our children, we need to make sure all children are,
With all
are
due
getting that support.
respect, do you find that with this job you have less parental involvement? And with all due respect, I mean it respect, but
It's quite a juggling act. No, it's a good question, and it's not easy to be a parent and have two full-time workers. My husband and I both keep very trying schedules. He travels a lot, and
your
it's
husband
easy.
is a professor at RPI in the Department of Chemical and Biological Engineering.
That's right.
Wow. So, I'm sure the brains from both of you rub off to the kids through osmosis even, but...
Well, they're more math kids, and I was not, so I guess I'm going to give them a little credit there.
But your husband was more of
And
math.
my husband's, I'll give him credit.
So, but I just want I just want to make the point that how do they, now you got your son taking care of your daughter
Helping,
in high
yes.
school. Yeah, protecting her, making sure that she has an easy transition, right? I hope that's...
Yes, he's been good to her.
Okay, well, that's good. And, is Albany High, are you nervous every day when, I hope that they're not involved in the mix if there's this problem at Albany High and they have to shut the school down for some reason, you hope it's not my kid that is involved?
I think it's like, I talk to parents a lot, and I think it's any school. If there's trouble and your kid is easily influenced, they're going to find it. If your child, you have to have, your children have to respect themselves first. They have to have a good sense of who they are and not easily influenced. And I think you can get a good education anywhere. And again, Albany, it does get a tough rap, but I think it's got so many wonderful things to offer. And my son, who's, again, entering his last year there, again, has done just exceptionally well, and my daughter as well. So I think I just want to make sure we get that for all students, right? And I think part of that's the parental engagement.
So you've kept your maiden name,
Yes.
because your husband is Bequette?
Wayne Beckett, yes.
Beckett,
yes.
okay. So do your children have Beckett as their last
Yes.
name? So if they got into trouble, it wouldn't be, the children of Assemblywoman Patricia Fahy, or former school board president.
I'm sure people would make the connection if they wanted. It's pretty well known, and they would make the connection.
Okay.
But they're good kids, as are the overwhelming majority of kids in all of our schools.
Well, I
right?
always say it's professionals, peers, and parents.
Yes,
Those three
well
P's
put.
are
That's
the
well
legs that make it the strong.
Yeah.
The one that's the weakest is the weakest link that will bring the kid down.
Yeah.
So if all three are strong, you're going to have success.
Well, that's why you hear me mentioning the parental
Yes.
engagement and that what I call positive peer pressure, but I like the way you characterize the three Ps.
Mark, if we can turn back to politics.
Okay.
That's good. A lot of times I hear on radio, Mark is more, like I say, statewide news. He's more the reporter, and I'm the rabbi, but I do obviously try to keep up with the news. And they always say, like, there are three men in the room for the budget. How much influence, again, you're new, but, half a year is a half a year. You've gone through a budget.
I have.
How much influence do you feel like you're a spectator, even though, of course, you're a Democrat and you are in the majority party? But still, do you feel you have a lot of influence in that, in the budget process, even in the assembly?
You're right. I have one budget under my belt, and now I have one full session under my belt. And that was something I was very warned about, because it's now gone from 3 men in a room to really 4 men in a room, because now we have 2 from the Senate side. So in that regard, in terms of the setting the boundaries on the budget, some of the biggest, most controversial issues, it really is still the 4 men in a room. I'm not going to kid anybody. Do I have a voice on a multitude of issues, and on some of those big issues, do I get to weigh in? I absolutely do. In conference, in the Democratic conference, and then I can stand up on the assembly floor anytime I want to speak on an issue, as long as it's relevant to the bill on the floor.
Even if it's against the assembly speaker?
Even if it is, and I have. And now the one thing that the speaker and the majority leader in the assembly ask is a courtesy. They ask for a heads up. There was a bill I raised concerns about at the very end of the session, and I just said, if this comes up, I'm going to raise concerns, I am going to speak. Great. Mixed martial arts. People thought that might or might not be coming up at the last few days of session, and that was rather controversial, with divisions on both sides of the aisle. There was no real It had support. It had support in different groups. I was able to speak up to say, you know, bad timing on this. We've had enough scandals. Let's not have another thing that is considered a negative issue, especially among many women. Let's not raise this again. And I think myself and a number of women prevailed on that. We did not see mixed martial arts go forward.
You don't want mixed martial arts?
I'm so sorry to disappoint.
Have you talked to your son about it? Does he watch it?
Luckily, he does not. I actually, one of the things I had to do just to research, because I was not familiar, and I try to, again, be open-minded. I remember one late night at midnight trying to pull up tapes so I could watch a little bit of what this mixed martial arts is all about. And it, you know, it's a little bit gruesome. I think there's...
You were horrified by this?
I'm not going to say horrified, because I understand there's some popular pieces. I understand there's just some extreme versions of it. But it's not something I want to condone.
But it's not a guy thing. I mean, there are a lot of women who like
oh,
it too.
yes. No,
So-
that's what I said. There is some Republican support, some Democratic support, women,
But
men.
you say that the women were the ones that
There
really stood
there
up
were
and said
few
no.
of us, not exclusively by any
Oh,
means,
okay,
not
okay.
exclusively, but it was just an example to say there are places where I can have my voice. They know now, every member in the conference knows how I feel about education. I talk all the time about trying to address the needs for after-school programs, the needs of, parent support, things, summer school, things of that nature.
So are they polite to you and say, oh, okay, thank you, Ms. Freshman Assemblywoman, thank you for your thoughts, and then they go on?
And then they go on and do what they're going to do. To some degree, I think politics is so much about building coalitions. There are 25 new members, 18 of them are freshmen. I have really made a point of trying to get all of them so that the freshmen can kind of be a block, and I check with a few of them if I'm going to raise an issue, and I'll say, wow, I've talked to 5 other members and a number of them have raised concerns on this bill. So I've done a lot of coalition building, if you will.
So in the time we have remaining, I want to get into some other of the more popular issues that the public might know about. We have an issue with the Assembly Speaker.
Yes.
And we have an issue with the former Assemblyman Vito Lopez. And we have an issue with Assemblyman Micah Kellner. So,
Oops.
okay.
Gone to a white
rolling.
screen there.
It's
We'll keep
public
rolling.
access.
If that's okay. Those
So
can be
we
fixed.
have, Micah Kellner lost his election, so he'll be back in the Assembly. Vito Lopez, the former Assemblyman, lost his election, so he's out of politics
out.
for now.
Yes.
And
thankfully.
Shelley Silver, the Assembly Speaker, who's an Orthodox Jew, has some issues in terms of giving legislators warnings for a couple of times before he actually takes action. So what do you make of all this hubbub in your first session,
Let me start by saying I have scandal fatigue. I think I had scandal fatigue within my first 2 months in the session, and the fatigue has continued. So there are some incidences that I'm rather outraged over, very upset over, very pleased that Mr. Lopez will now be out of office and that he lost yesterday. I'm also pleased that Mr. Kellner lost. And but
you
he
wanna
will be
see him
coming
back?
back. Well, it does
You
mean
miss
he's
him
coming
that
back.
much?
No, I do think that it's actually funny. I was just having a conversation on that, and I think we do need to look to make sure that there will be full reprimands, if not censuring, of Mr. Kellner. I think we have to. There's been many steps, and I give the speaker credit on this, to change the culture. And I've talked to virtually every other female Assemblywoman, at least in the conference, the Democratic conference. So I know there have been many changes. Are we where we need to be? Absolutely not. Do I think the speaker is trying? Do I think he has been legitimately contrite? I do. Does that mean my concerns are addressed? No, I think we have more work to do. We have to change the culture fully.
So how does it come, how do you justify the fact that people, in the media, people, whether it's quoted in the article or it's an editorial board or whatever, that they say, how can the women not want to oust the Assembly Speaker and take over the Assembly or do something to make the final statement and then, or, to say, or you know, here you were standing, all the women in the Democratic Conference were standing up with the Assembly Speaker saying, we're in back of you, we support you, you have our support. And that kind of sent a wrong message in some circles. So how do you justify
been
that?
a difficult issue. I have to take the advice of those who know the speaker much longer than I. I have to look at all of the actions and the things that happen in place. He was ready to, before Mr. Lopez resigned from the Assembly, he was ready to force a vote, to force his resignation. I'm hoping that we may be doing the same with Mr. Kellner. So I am trying to look at the full picture here with the speaker. I have expressed one-on-one, I've expressed my very serious concerns and how upset I am to read of the previous actions. But we also know in politics it's very rare that somebody legitimately admits their mistakes. And I give the speaker a lot of credit for that. The other thing is, you know, we have a new session upon us and who knows what that will bring. But at this point, I was brand new to the Assembly. I didn't want to see us get into 2 months in the thick of the budget and have complete chaos reign. The speaker is the most progressive man in that four-person room that we just talked about.
But why stand up in back of him and show your support? Why not just not, you know, stand up in that news conference and say you're supporting him? Why not just avoid, you know, be neutral?
I'm trying to remember which news. Was that on the Women's Equality Act? I think that might have been on the Women's Equality Act when we were standing behind him. I'm trying to remember if there was a specific one on this.
There was a specific one when he gave his mea culpa, and he said, "I'm sorry."
And
I really
okay.
don't.
Sorry, yeah, that was earlier that was before the Micah Kellner
yes,
issue.
oh, absolutely.
Yes, that was a few months before. I was thinking of one of the last ones.
Right. No. So
the other issue, though, is the speaker is the most progressive of the four we just spoke to, and I try to remember that we wouldn't have had a minimum wage increase, one of the few states in this country that has raised the minimum wage.
if it wasn't for the Assembly.
If it weren't for the speaker. So on the broader picture, am I satisfied? No. Am I outraged over some of the things that were slid under the rug? Absolutely. Was he the perpetrator? No, he was not the perpetrator.
Okay.
Is he making the changes? Yes. Are they fast enough? I'm waiting to see. There's a task force that's been set up to redo some of the procedures on sexual harassment. Yeah, we need to have that done before we head back into session. So there are some things. I'm not going to tell you I'm satisfied. I'm not going to tell you I'm satisfied, but I'm not ready to call for further chaos.
Okay. Do you know of anyone in the circles who have been, who might be wanting to be a successor? You're a freshman, you're not going to be the successor. I already had that joke with someone else. But do you know of people who said to come up to you and said, you know, I really want you to support me because I'm working this out.
You know, Mark, you raise an excellent point. I think one of the reasons that you have seen the conference exclusively hold together, other than two members who had not supported the speaker to begin with. There's only two that have you know, said that they're not supporting, but they never did support him. So otherwise, I mean, for over 100, I guess that's 105 members who have stood by him, which is pretty extraordinary, the entire. And I think one of the reasons you've seen that is there is no heir apparent.
There isn't.
There is no heir apparent, and I do worry about chaos and
so the name that comes up is Deborah Glick, and she's on chair of the Higher Education Committee. You're on the Higher Education Committee. Do you feel that she would be an appropriate person?
I have nothing but admiration just getting to know her. I knew of her both before this. I have a friend that's worked for her. Nothing but admiration. Whether she's ready to step into a role, I don't know.
Okay.
I have not had a, I'll be honest, of the women, there's, you know, I had a lot of talks with the women, especially when the Women's Equality Act bill did not go through. There is no talk of that at this point. There is no talk of who is ready to step in.
Okay.
And I think that's why the speaker retains some of his support.
Okay, so we'll check in with you another time when maybe you'll have some news and you'll keep me posted as to what.
It's never been a dull moment. I will say that, not a dull moment,
All
but
right, so I think we're out of
very
time.
sobering.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's about time. Well, thank you, Assemblywoman Pat Fahy. And again, we only wish you the best success. And again, come around to Jewish View and you'll come and give us some bigger and better news about what's happening.
Thank you.
Assembly.
My pleasure.
Thanks
Really
for being
appreciate
here.
the opportunity. Thank you.